So there are some similarities if you look at literature around the globe over the course of many hundreds of years. There's certain structures that pop up over and over again. And so I'm interested in how the structure is both the same and also changes depending on what place we're talking about, what the culture is, and then also what time period. And the concept is a story within a story. And let's start out with Beowulf. The straight line symbolizes just the normal storytelling within Beowulf. And the little brackets are the stories within the stories. Now, this is just, I'm not doing an authentic, realistic, I don't know if there are 5. There might be slightly more than 5. I don't know if they're positioned exactly right, but it's the basic concept that I want you to get. You'll notice that there aren't that many, and that the larger narrative, Grendel's mom coming while everyone's drinking and having a good time, like Grendel's mom would come right here and kill a few people, and right before she would come, they would tell a story. But what's interesting is that the stories within Beowulf are not very well told. Their connection to the larger narrative is a little ambiguous and confusing, and it's not clear exactly why they're in there, and it's not the part of the narrative that you really remember. So this is how it works in one text. Now, in Shakespeare, you don't even have that many. So there aren't that many in Shakespeare, and when they do exist, so this is Hamlet. And this is something like, don't quote me on this, I may be wrong, Act 3, Scene 2. Hamlet, because he's a little suspicious that his father-in-law and his mom are responsible for his dad's death, he creates a play where that theme of killing one's father is part of this little play within a play. And it's only one of them, and the relationship between the little story and the larger narrative is fairly clear. He's doing it to sort of see if they look guilty or start sweating when they're watching the play. So this is kind of normal compared to this. I don't know why these stories are in here. Is it for entertainment? Is it little subtle commentary? Whereas in Shakespeare, it's pretty clear, at least in Hamlet. Midsummer Night's Dream, maybe not as clear. So this is very simple, and it's interesting to me that, I'll show you the Decameron. Decameron's written somewhere, I think, between Beowulf and Hamlet, and it's very, very orderly. There are 10 tales per day, 1 tale per person. There's a theme of the day that you have to stick to, and this is what the whole narrative is like. There's no exceptions. I have to say that the larger narrative ceases to become that important. The plague is happening. We hear about the plague early on. But really, the plague recedes in importance, which is a little odd, and these stories are the main part of the narrative. So This is an Italian text which we will hopefully read. So you can see there's a big difference between sort of random, between one, and between now it's the entire actual show. The last thing I want to say about the Decameron is that the people who tell the stories are almost indistinguishable from one another. I can't remember, I think there are like 5 guys and 5 gals. Half the time I can't really tell which person it is. There's this one kind of humorous, kind of raunchy guy, and he's the only one I can kind of say, oh, this must be one of his tales because of the content. The Chaucer's Canterbury Tales is somewhat like this. It's of the 3, it's the closest like this. The only difference between Chaucer and Boccaccio is that some people have really short tales, some people have really long tales, and you can tell the Wife of Bath does not sound at all like the Friar or the Reeve's tale. So the individual tales become much more distinct over time. So that's a huge difference between those two. But the basic structure is kind of the same. Now, if you go away from the West, let me draw you what an Eastern version of this looks like. So this is 1001 Arabian Nights. And Scheherazade, it seems like it would be orderly because she tells a different story every night. But this is what makes it kind of unique. Within that story that she tells, it wouldn't be unusual that the characters in that story would then tell a story. So you have little stories within the larger tale. So it's fairly complex. You have different levels to it. And here your question is, with Chaucer in particular, what's the relationship between the outside and the inside? But with 1001 Nights, you have to think about it as far as levels. Like, what are the stories in this level have to do with this story? And then what do they all have to do with what's going on with Scheherazade outside of all the stories? So it gets kind of complex. And hopefully we'll read this term too so you can see the levels of complexity. The most complex version of this that I've ever read is an Indian text that probably was influenced by Zoroastrians who came from Iran. It's sort of like this, but it even gets more so. So like, if this story has like a chicken talking to a rooster, the rooster then begins to tell a story. It's not always symmetrical, so it's not like every single subcategory gets its own story. And it gets so complex and so far away from the main narrative that at some points when I read it, I kind of forgot, like, where are we? What's the point? I get kind of lost. That doesn't happen so much in 1001 Nights. And we're not going to read the Indian text, so I won't sort of bother with you. What I want you to focus on is the number of stories, their relationship to the larger narrative, which is more important, the stories or the larger narrative, and then how good it's interesting that over time, the storytelling within gets better and the larger narrative gets less important. Something that's similar to 1001 Nights, which we'll read, is Conference of the Birds. it shares that weird leveled thing. Maybe not as complex. I would say 1001 Nights has the most levels. Conference of the Birds is closest to it. And it's not surprising that these are Eastern texts and that these are Western texts. I also think it's interesting that these tend to be more organized over time, and these tend to be what we would consider chaotic. Okay, so think about it as you're reading these different things. These are my thoughts on this. I haven't ever read anyone writing on this. So you may have different thoughts about how all this works. You may disagree. But think about it definitely as you read these works. Hopefully you won't read Beowulf because you guys hate it. Okay, good luck.